The Valkyrie delegation's first mistake was assuming that the humans' reliance on projectile weapons meant they were primitive. Their second mistake was sending Karthak to observe them. Standing at his observation post aboard the diplomatic station Unity 1, Karthak's secondary hearts fluttered as he watched the human diplomatic team approach. His iridescent scales shifted from their natural blue to a slight purple, a physiological response that thankfully only his own species would recognize as attraction. The leader of the human delegation, Ambassador Zara Henderson, moved with a grace that belied her species' reputation for brutish simplicity. "Welcome to Unity 1, Karthak said, his translator converting his harmonic tones into standard human English. "I am cultural observer Karthak." Zara's smile caused his scales to ripple again. "Thank you, observer. I look forward to proving that humans and Valkyrie can move past our initial misunderstandings." Those misunderstandings included 3 border skirmishes where human ships had successfully defended their territory using what the Valkyrie High Command dismissed as primitive kinetic weapons. Karthak had studied the after-action reports extensively, and unlike his superiors, he saw something that worried him: innovation. "Ambassador Henderson," he said, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the conference chambers, "I've studied your species extensively. There's something I've been curious about: why do humans still carry physical weapons when energy-based alternatives are clearly superior?" Zara's hand unconsciously moved to the ceremonial sword at her hip, a tradition for human diplomats that the Valkyrie had grudgingly allowed. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, Observer Karthak. Would you like to see it?" Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in an ominous glow. Karthak's scales shifted to alert yellow as his neural implant fed him security data. "Pirate raiders," he announced. "Rogue elements looking to disrupt the peace talks. Our energy shields are dash." An explosion rocked the station, cutting him off. The superior energy shields had failed against the raiders' concentrated ion burst. "This way," Zara said, drawing her sword in one fluid motion. Karthak wanted to laugh at the absurdity of facing space pirates with a metal blade, but something in her stance stopped him. They rounded a corner to find 3 raiders, their energy weapons primed. Time seemed to slow as Karthak watched what happened next. Zara moved like liquid mercury. The sword in her hand wasn't just a weapon, it was an extension of her body. Before the raiders could discharge their energy weapons, she had closed the distance. The blade flashed once, twice, 3 times. The raiders' weapons clattered to the floor, their hands still gripping the triggers. "Human blades are weighted to work in variable gravity," Zara explained casually, wiping the sword clean. "Energy weapons become unreliable in fluctuating gravitational fields. Like, for instance, when artificial gravity is damaged by an ion burst." Karthak stared at her, his scales now a mix of admiration gold and fear white. "You knew this would happen." "Not this specifically," she smiled, leading them toward the emergency bunkers. "But humans plan for everything. It's why we keep the old ways alongside the new. Speaking of which." She pulled a projectile pistol from her diplomatic robes. "Here. The magnetic acceleration still works even if power fails." As they made their way through the station, dispatching raiders with a combination of human ingenuity and Valkyrie tech, Karthak began to understand something his superiors had missed. Humans weren't primitive for keeping their obsolete weapons. They were brilliant for never abandoning what worked. The real revelation came hours later, after station security had been restored. Karthak found Zara in the observation deck, her sword still at her hip, watching the stars. "Your weapons aren't primitive at all, are they?" he asked. "They're tested. Proven. Perfect in their simplicity. Finally figuring us out, observer." Her smile made his scales shift again. "I think I'm just beginning to," he replied, knowing that his report to the Valkyrie High Command would fall on deaf ears. They wouldn't understand until it was too late. humans didn't keep their old weapons out of tradition or stubbornness. They kept them because they worked. And as he watched Zara Henderson silhouetted against the stars, K.R. Thak realized he was beginning to understand much more than just human military doctrine. The real danger wasn't their weapons at all, it was their ability to make anyone, even a Valkyrie cultural observer, fall in love with their contradictions. The Valkyrie High Command's war room pulsed with holographic displays showing human fleet movements. K.R. Thak stood before the assembled admirals, his scales shifting nervously between shades of concern gray and frustration orange as he delivered his report. The Unity 1 incident proves that we're underestimating human combat capabilities, he insisted, projecting footage of Zara's sword work against the raiders. Their reliance on physical weapons isn't a weakness, it's a deliberate tactical choice. High Admiral Vexthar's bioluminescent patterns flashed with dismissal. Observer K.R. Thak, your fascination with human warfare borders on obsession. Their projectile weapons and metal blades cannot stand against our plasma arrays and quantum disruption fields. With respect, High Admiral, you're wrong. K.R. Thak's scales flushed with determination red. I've spent 3 months studying them. They don't think like us. They don't plan like us. And most importantly, they don't fight like us. The footage shifted to classified combat recordings, human ships executing maneuvers that should have torn them apart, human marines boarding Valkyrie vessels using nothing but reinforced hulls and grappling hooks, human weapons functioning perfectly in conditions that rendered energy weapons useless. They call it redundancy, K.R. Thak explained. Every system has a backup. Every backup has a backup. When their advanced technology fails, they have intermediate technology. When that fails, they have primitive technology. And all of it works. Enough. Vexthar's patterns now pulsed with anger. You're dismissed, observer. Your obvious emotional compromise regarding the humans has been noted. K.R. Thak knew what that meant. He'd be reassigned, his warnings ignored. As he left the war room, his neural implant pinged with a message from Zara, meeting tonight? The usual place. Their usual place was a small observation lounge on Diplomatic Station 7, technically neutral ground between human and Valkyrie space. K.R. Thak found her there hours later, watching a binary star system through the reinforced windows. They're not listening, he said without preamble. Zara didn't turn from the view. Neither are my superiors. They think the Valkyrie are all bluster. That you'll never actually attack. We will. K.R. Thak moved beside her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her body. Humans ran so much hotter than his species. The High Command has already drawn up invasion plans. They think your outer colonies will fall within days. Now she did turn, and K.R. Thak's scales rippled with colors he'd never shown before. 3 months of clandestine meetings, of sharing cultural insights and personal stories, had done nothing to diminish the effect she had on him. Those colonies are more dangerous than your people realize, she said softly. We built them to survive anything. The colonists are even tougher than their fortifications. I know. I've tried to explain. About the colonial militia training, the hidden bunkers, the stockpiles of obsolete, but thoroughly reliable weapons. About how humans are at their most dangerous when backed into a corner. He paused, his scales showing bands of worry purple. But there's something else. Something I discovered in the classified files. Zara's hand found his, her 5 fingers intertwining with his 7 in a gesture that had become familiar. Tell me. Project Prometheus. The High Command thinks they've found a way to neutralize all advanced technology in a sector. They think it will leave human forces helpless. To his surprise, Zara smiled. Let me guess, it generates a quantum field that disrupts any technology more advanced than simple combustion engines. K.R. Thak's scales flashed shock white. How did you dash? Because we invented it 60 years ago. Discovered it wasn't practical for long-term use, but kept the research in a database we knew your intelligence services would hack. Her smile turned predatory. We've been preparing for it ever since. Every soldier trained with primitive weapons. Every ship equipped with backup systems. Every colony ready to fight with everything from railguns to crossbows. Thak felt his scales shift through every color in his emotional spectrum. It's a trap. The biggest trap in military history. Zara's hand tightened on his. And I'm telling you because I don't want to see your people die needlessly. The Valkyrie aren't ready for what humanity can do when we're truly threatened. Why? Thak's voice was barely a whisper. Why tell me this? It's treason. Because I've spent 3 months falling in love with you, she said simply. Because I believe you and I represent what our species could be together instead of against each other. And because in about 10 minutes, the Valkyrie fleet is going to launch their first strike against New Dawn Colony, and everything is going to change. As if on cue, Thak's neural implant flooded with tactical data. The Valkyrie attack fleet had just left hyperspace. Project Prometheus was powering up. And Zara Henderson, the human who had captured both his hearts, was crying. I'm so sorry, she whispered. For what's about to happen to your people. For what my people are about to do in the name of survival. And most of all, for loving you when I knew this day was coming. Through the observation window, the binary stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that below them, the galaxy was about to learn exactly why humanity's primitive weapons were anything but primitive. The war was about to begin. The Valkyrie fleet emerged from hyperspace above New Dawn Colony like a swarm of crystalline predators, their ships gleaming with advanced energy weapons and quantum shields. High Admiral Vextar stood on his command bridge, bioluminescent patterns glowing with anticipated victory. Initiate Project Prometheus, he ordered. Let's show these humans the futility of their primitive ways. The massive device at the fleet center activated, sending out waves of quantum disruption that should have reduced every piece of advanced technology in the sector to useless scrap. On the tactical displays, the few human ships in orbit went dark, their engines failing as expected. Vextar's victory patterns lasted exactly 3 seconds. That's when the first volley of magnetically accelerated tungsten rods struck his fleet. Simple physics, mass times velocity. No advanced technology required. Just gravity and momentum, turning simple metal into civilization-ending weapons. Impossible, he whispered, watching 3 of his best ships split apart under the barrage. Their weapons should be disabled. Below, on New Dawn's surface, the colony's true nature revealed itself. What had appeared to be simple agricultural domes split open like flowers made of steel, revealing batteries of railguns that required nothing more sophisticated than electricity and magnetism to function. Defensive positions that had registered as primitive earthworks turned out to be hiding places for weapons that needed no quantum circuits or plasma containment to tear Valkyrie ships apart. In orbit, the disabled human ships suddenly roared back to life. Their advanced systems hadn't failed, they'd been deliberately shut down, allowing the ships to drop into New Dawn's gravity well like the deadliest rocks in history. Message from the human forces, Admiral, his communications officer reported, scales showing terror white. Put it through, Vextar ordered, already knowing what he would hear. This is Colonel Raina Blackwood of the New Dawn Defense Force, a calm human voice announced. We've spent 60 years preparing for this exact scenario. Every weapon we're using right now was specifically chosen because it would work under quantum disruption. Would you like to discuss surrender terms? Before Vextar could respond, a new wave of destruction swept through his fleet. Missiles that used mechanical timers instead of electronic guidance. Kinetic kill vehicles guided by simple gyroscopes. And boarding torpedoes carrying human marines armed with those primitive projectile weapons and bladed weapons. Thak watched it all unfold from Diplomatic Station 7, his scales shifting between horror gray and admiration gold. Beside him, Zara's face showed no joy in the victory, only grim determination. Your people never needed advanced weapons, he realized. You just let everyone think you did. Humanity learned long ago never to rely on any single technology, she replied. We keep the old ways alive not out of sentiment, but because they work. They've always worked. And they'll keep working long after the fancy stuff fails. A flash on the tactical display showed another Valkyrie capital ship succumbing to the relentless barrage of kinetic weapons. The mighty fleet that had arrived to subjugate a primitive colony was being systematically destroyed by the very primitiveness they'd mocked. They'll surrender soon, Zara said softly. Your admiral is arrogant, but he's not stupid. The question is what happens next. Karthak turned to her, his scales now showing the complex patterns that his species used to indicate deep emotional turmoil. I should be with my people. They'll see me as a traitor for being here with you. You tried to warn them. That counts for something. Does it? When I chose to tell you about Project Prometheus Dash. You chose to try to prevent unnecessary death, she interrupted. The fact that you failed doesn't make the choice wrong. Another explosion lit up the tactical display. The Valkyrie fleet was now actively retreating, their formation broken, their confidence shattered. But Karthak barely noticed. He was too busy watching Zara's face, seeing the conflict there between victory and sorrow. What happens to us now? He asked. That depends, she replied, finally meeting his gaze. On whether your people learn from this. On whether they can accept that humanity's strength isn't in our technology, but in our ability to survive and adapt using whatever tools we have available. And maybe, on whether two people from different stars can prove that understanding between our species is possible. Karthak's scales shifted to a color he'd never shown before, hope silver, tinged with love rose. Is it? Possible, I mean. We're here, aren't we? Despite everything, despite this war, despite what just happened at New Dawn, we're still here. Still trying. Still believing that there's something worth saving between our peoples. Through the observation window, they could see escape pods from the Valkyrie fleet being collected by human rescue ships. Even in victory, even after being attacked, humanity was showing mercy to their defeated foes. Your people are extraordinary, Karthak said softly. No, Zara corrected him. We're just human. This is what we do. We fight with everything we have, but we never forget our humanity in the process. That's the real lesson your people need to learn, not about our weapons, but about who we are. As they watched the rescue operations continue, Karthak realized that the war's first battle might have been won with primitive weapons, but the peace that followed would require something far more sophisticated, understanding, compassion, and love. Even if that love had to cross the stars to find its home. The Valkyrie High Council chamber had never felt so cold. Karthak stood before the assembled leaders of his species, his scales steadfastly maintaining their truth-telling silver despite the hostility radiating from the gathered counselors. The footage from the Battle of New Dawn played behind him in a continuous loop, a reminder of how thoroughly humanity had shattered Valkyrie military supremacy. You knew, High Admiral Vexthar accused, his patterns flashing with rage. You knew about their preparations and you said nothing. I told you everything, Karthak responded calmly. In 13 separate reports, I detailed humanity's tactical redundancy, their deliberate technological regression, their maintenance of primitive, but effective weapon systems. You chose not to listen. First Speaker Tal raised a hand for silence, her ancient scales shifting through thoughtful patterns. Observer Karthak, you understand that your relationship with the human ambassador complicates matters. My relationship with Ambassador Henderson is precisely why I understand humanity better than anyone in this chamber, Karthak replied. They are not what we thought they were. They're not primitive, they're not simple, and they're not our enemies unless we force them to be. The chamber erupted in argument, counselors' bioluminescent patterns creating a chaos of clashing colors. Through it all, Karthak maintained his steady silver, even as his heart ached for what he knew must come next. Thousands of light-years away, Zara stood before her own council on Earth. The chamber was darker than the Valkyries, lit only by necessary illumination, another example of human practicality that K.R. Thak had come to admire. "The Valkyrie fleet is in full retreat," she reported. "New Dawn's defenses performed exactly as designed. Our casualties were minimal, and we're treating their wounded with the same care as our own." "And your contact within their hierarchy?" General Santos asked, his scarred face impassive. "This. K.R. Thak." Zara's face remained professional, though it cost her dearly. "He provided valuable intelligence, but more importantly, he represents a faction within Valkyrie society that recognizes the potential for peaceful coexistence." "Yet you developed an emotional attachment," another council member noted. "One that could compromise Dash." "One that proves our species can find common ground," Zara interrupted. "The Valkyrie aren't our enemies. They're a proud species who made the mistake of underestimating us. Now they know better. The question is, what do we do with that knowledge?" Back in Valkyrie space, K.R. Thak was asking the same question. "We have two paths before us," he told the council. "We can continue this war, throwing more ships and lives against humanity's defenses, learning the hard way that every defeat will only reveal new depths to their preparedness. Or. First speaker Tall prompted. "Or we can admit that we were wrong. Not just about their weapons, but about who they are. We dismissed them as primitive because they maintained old technologies alongside new ones. The truth is, they simply never forgot that the purpose of any weapon, any tool, is to work when needed." He touched a control, changing the display to show human rescue ships saving Valkyrie crews. "This is who they really are. Capable of devastating violence when threatened, but equally capable of compassion even toward those who sought to destroy them." In the Earth Council chamber, Zara was making a similar point. "The Valkyrie aren't evil, they're proud, and pride can be deadly. But they can learn. They can change. I've seen it happen." "In your K.R. Thak, you mean," General Santos said softly. "In him first, yes. But others will follow. The Battle of New Dawn didn't just prove our military capabilities, it proved that everything they thought they knew about us was wrong. That's an opportunity." Both councils deliberated through their respective nights. Both K.R. Thak and Zara waited, separated by vast distances but united in their hope for something better than war. The messages reached them simultaneously. To K.R. Thak, the council requires a liaison to human space. Someone who understands them. You leave immediately. To Zara, Ambassador, your new post will be establishing a permanent diplomatic mission in Valkyrie space. Your unique insights will be valuable. They met at their usual place on Diplomatic Station 7, the binary stars bearing witness as they had so many times before. This time, though, something was different. "Official diplomatic credentials," Zara said, showing him her new documentation. "No more sneaking around for clandestine meetings." K.R. Thak's scales rippled with joy gold and love rose. They're actually going to try. Both sides. They're going to try to understand each other. Thanks to you, she smiled. You risked everything to prevent a war. Thanks to us, he corrected. We proved it was possible. Different species, different evolutionary paths. Same hearts, she finished. Even if you have two of them. Above them, rescue ships continued their work, human and Valkyrie crews working together to save lives rather than take them. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were worth crossing galaxies for. A year after the Battle of New Dawn, humanity and the Valkyrie stood at another crossroads. This time, however, the battlefield was a massive orbital construction above Earth, the first joint military exercise between the two species. Karthak watched from the observation deck as human and Valkyrie ships maneuvered together, his scales shimmering with pride gold. Beside him, Zara monitored the exercise with professional interest, though her hand remained intertwined with his. "Your specialists still seem uncomfortable with our kinetic weapons," she noted. "Just as your officers remain skeptical of our quantum fields," he replied. "Old prejudices die hard." Below them, a human destroyer demonstrated what they called a fighting retreat, using gravity assists and minimal power to maintain combat effectiveness even with its main systems apparently disabled. The Valkyrie commanders watching the display flickered patterns of understanding blue. Finally, they were learning. "Joint Command, this is Exercise Control," a voice announced. "Beginning Scenario Alpha 7, Total Technology Failure." This was the moment Karthak had been waiting for. The scenario they'd spent months preparing for. As planned, all advanced technology on both human and Valkyrie vessels suddenly went dark. What happened next would determine the future of both species. The human ships immediately switched to their backup systems, the primitive, but reliable technology that had proved so devastating at New Dawn. But this time, they weren't alone. The Valkyrie ships, under Karthak's guidance, had been retrofitted with similar systems. "Look," Zara whispered, pointing to the tactical display. Where once there had been chaos, now there was coordination. Human ships using mechanical systems worked in perfect concert with Valkyrie vessels employing their own version of technological redundancy. What had been a weakness was now a strength multiplied by cooperation. "Message from High Admiral Vexthar," a communications officer announced. Karthak tensed, but Zara squeezed his hand reassuringly. The High Admiral had been their strongest opponent, but also, surprisingly, their most dedicated student after New Dawn. "Put it through," Zara ordered. Vexthar's image appeared, his patterns showing satisfaction green. "Ambassador Henderson, Observer Karthak. The exercise results are illuminating. It seems we had much to learn from human military doctrine." "As we had much to learn from Valkyrie precision," Zara replied diplomatically. "Our strengths complement each other." "Indeed." The High Admiral's patterns shifted to formal blue. "The High Council has reviewed the preliminary results. They are prepared to proceed with the Joint Defense Treaty." Karthak's scales rippled with joygold so bright it nearly illuminated the room. A year of work, of bridging cultures and overcoming prejudices, was finally bearing fruit. "There is one other matter," Vexthar continued, his patterns now showing an emotion Karthak had never seen him display, amusement purple. "The Council has also reviewed your petition regarding interspecies unions." Zara's grip on Karthak's hand tightened. They'd submitted the petition months ago, knowing it might cost them everything. The human government had approved it almost immediately, their experience with the Battle of New Dawn had taught them to trust Zara's judgment. But the Valkyrie. "It is the Council's opinion," Vexthar said formally, "that any union which could produce understanding such as yours is beneficial to both our species. Your petition is granted." The transmission ended, leaving Karthak and Zara alone with news that would change both their lives and the future of their species. "Well," Zara said, her voice thick with emotion, "I guess we're officially making history." "We've been making history since the day you showed me that a sword could be just as effective as a plasma cannon," Karthak replied, his scales now a complex swirl of love rose and joygold. Below them, the exercise continued. Human ingenuity merged with Valkyrie precision. Old technology worked seamlessly alongside new. Two species, once on the brink of war, now moved in perfect harmony. "You know what this means," Zara said softly. "Our children will be the first of their kind. Neither fully human nor fully Valkyrie. They'll be something better," Karthak replied. "They'll be proof that understanding is possible. That love can cross any distance, bridge any difference." As if to underscore his words, a flight of human fighters executed a perfect formation with their Valkyrie counterparts, their primitive, projectile weapons synchronized with advanced energy beams in a display of unified strength. The Battle of New Dawn taught us that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in our weapons, Zara mused. It was in our ability to adapt, to find solutions no one else had considered. And now? Karthak asked. Now we've learned that our greatest strength is in finding ways to work together. To take the best of both our species and create something new. As they watched the exercise conclude, Karthak reflected on how far they'd come. From a cultural observer fascinated by human weapons, to a bridge between species. From forbidden love to officially sanctioned union. From the brink of war to the cusp of an unprecedented peace. What happens next? He asked. Zara smiled, looking out at the stars that had brought them together. We keep building. Keep learning. Keep proving that the universe is big enough for all of us, as long as we're willing to understand each other. Above them, the first joint fleet of human and Valkyrie ships formed up, ready to defend their shared space against any threat. Their weapons were diverse, some old, some new, some simple, some complex. But their purpose was singular, to protect the peace that love had built. The end.